It's my delight to be able to introduce Bridget Moix. I have a description. I'm going to read a little bit about some of the various things that Bridget has done in her life. I will start, though, by telling you two descriptors that I think are really important about Bridget. One is that she's a very joyful person, and you will see that when you watch her speak and you listen to her speak, and that's a delight. The other is that she's an international Quaker, and what I mean by that is that she knows Quakers around the world, and she's worked with Quakers around the world, and you're going to hear a little bit about that, I think, in some of her remarks, but also in the introduction. She began her career in Washington 19 years ago as an FCNL intern, now known as Young Fellow. She returned and developed FCNL's what was then called the Peaceful Prevention of Deadly Conflict program, and she returned to lead the foreign policy team as senior legislative secretary. She served on FCNL's executive committee during the initial planning for our green building. She's worked and served on committees with many other Quaker organizations, including the Quaker United Nations Office, AFSC, Casa de los Amigos in Mexico, and Quaker Peace Center in Cape Town, South Africa. So you get why she's an international Quaker. She's taught a number of courses on peace and conflict at different universities, and she's currently teaching international conflict resolution at George Washington University. And she'll be teaching Quaker social witness at Haverford this spring. She serves as the U.S. Senior Representative for Peace Direct, a United Kingdom-based organization which was founded by two British friends, and it's dedicated to supporting local peace builders in situations of conflict around the world. She's also working on her dissertation at George Mason University, exploring the question, why and how people choose peace in the midst of violence. At George Mason, she's served as senior fellow for the Genocide Prevention Program, and she recently spent 2 years working inside U.S. government as an atrocity prevention fellow at USAID, where she saw the work of the Atrocities Prevention Board firsthand. She lives with her wonderful spouse here in Washington and her two adventurous sons, who challenge her peacemaking skills every day. Bridget, we will just send her into silence for a period of time, and Bridget will speak from the silence. Following her remarks, there will be time for questions, which I'll be moderating.
It is such a joy to be with you here this evening and to be back with FCNL at an annual meeting. I did start with FCNL 19 years ago, as Diane said, as what was an intern then. And I don't know if I'm an international Quaker, but I know I'll always be an FCNL Quaker. So it's really, really good to be back with you. I want to put a little subtitle to the title of the talk. I think in the program it says, "If war is not the from war is not the answer to peace building." Right, and so this is the pivot we're looking to make in our work at FCNL. I want to put a semicolon after that and call it a tale of two oceans as well. And friends here will know of the Ocean of Darkness and Ocean of Light from George Fox, and I'll talk a little bit about why I think that's a fitting metaphor for the work we've been doing. I want to say a big thank you to everyone here, to FCNL for inviting me, to all the people who really mentor me and have given me the career path and the spiritual path that I feel I've been on. I really do have to say that whatever I've done since being an FCNL intern, I really do have you to give the credit to. And any blame for anything I've done, I guess I'll keep that to myself. But I really do feel that the work I've done is continually shaped by my experience with FCNL. I am constantly telling people about what Quaker lobbying is, and that relationships are the core of change and of advocacy. And I learned that all with you. I was asked to do a couple things tonight, and I hope you'll do them with me and that this can be interactive and engaging. I was asked first to give the long view on the pathway to peace, The Pathway to Peacebuilding, Give the Long View. And I think this is, I was really excited when they asked me to do this, because usually, I've always been an FCNL intern, I always will be, but I think now I'm giving the long view. I actually I've hit the 40s, I have glasses, I have 2 kids, you saw them running around earlier, so I've graduated to being able to give at least a little bit of the long view. So I'm excited about talking about the long view with you. I was also asked to think about inspiration and hope, and that was a more challenging ask, actually. It's been a tough week in Washington on some of the issues that I work on. It's been a tough few years, it feels like, right? It's just feels like a tough time. But I am very hopeful being here with you tonight, and so I hope we can talk about a hope and the inspiration together as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the long view, and then I want to talk a little bit about where we've come, and then I want to talk about where we are, and then I want to talk about where we might be going from here, how we're making a pivot, hopefully, towards peace-building in U.S. policy. I'm going to speak from my own experience, which is what I have to offer, and so I hope there'll be lots of time for a discussion afterwards. But I do have a small piece of business first, if you'll bear with me. One of the things that's happened as I have started various jobs and working with different organizations and now doing my PhD and teaching as well, is I have a lot of email. Does anyone else have this problem? You have a lot of email. Yeah, there's one hand. Thank you. So I don't actually answer emails very well anymore. I used to be really good about this. I used to clean my email box out every day. I'm not very good. So I have an unanswered email here that I just want to answer. Bob Schultz. Where is Bob Schultz? Bob, you wrote me on October 12th. And I said, yeah, I really want to get back to you about that. I'll get back to you. I haven't gotten back to you. So I actually want to read this email from Bob. I hope it's okay. This isn't WikiLeaks, but I hope it's okay if I read this and answer you. Thank you. So Bob says, hi, Bridget. You've been on my mind off and on lately because I know you're coming to speak at annual meeting. He looks forward to seeing me. And you came to mind as I finished reading A Thread of Grace, which is a book by Mary Doria Russell, extraordinary novel about the last years of World War II in northwest Italy under Nazi occupation. Sounds like a book we should all be reading. Is that right, Bob? He says, my own FCNL work has been with Jose and Emily on climate disruption. Thank you, Bob, for doing that work. Repeatedly, I've been reminded of the point made in a book I read in the 70s with my environmental ethics students. The long view, the 70s, he was working on environment. The book is The Limits to Growth, and the point made by Donella Meadows et al. Is that we human beings have a powerful tendency to pay attention to what is near to us, both in time and space, and to neglect what is not. That fact creates an essential part of the problem, it seems to me, in getting people to attend both to climate disruption and to the prevention of deadly conflict. And he goes on to say that as he finished this book, there was a quote in it about yet another casualty of a war that began long before it started and has not ended yet. That feels present today, doesn't it? If I understand your work, our work, I will say, Bob, it's partly at least about applying to the specter of deadly conflict the homely maxim that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And my sense is that it's a tough sell to get any of us, legislators included, to take that maxim seriously and to act on it in the here and the now. And that's the sell that defines, for me, our task as we face next month's, that would be tomorrow's, lobbying sessions on the Hill. So, Bob, you're right. And you could probably just come up and to give this talk yourself. Well, I tried. That is the task, and that is the challenge. But I think we actually have a lot of good news. I think you've heard today that there's a level of attention to prevention that we didn't have before, and that there's an opportunity to move toward greater effect on peace building than we've had, I think, ever before in U.S. policy. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the long view. And I want to call on the spirit of Elise Boulding. How many people know of Elise Boulding? Maybe you knew her. Great. So is there a runner mic, a little carry-along mic? Elise had this. Is it here? Elise had this. Aha, found it. Elise, is it on? Technology. Great. Now? Yes? Yes. So Elise Boulding had the idea of the 200-year present. How many people maybe know a little bit? Great. So the 200-year present, as I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about it, is the idea that we live in a space and time that has immense connections to the past and immense connections to the future. And that change happens in this pretty long space from the 200 years she describes are, so starting today, right now in this moment that we're in, someone who might be 100 years today, the 100 years span of their life. So 100 years ago is the first starting point from today. And then the end of that 200-year spectrum is 100 years, say someone born today would live for 100 years. And so that spectrum is connected through all those people who live and interact and the efforts that they make through those time. Just today, right now, we're living that 200-year present. That's the idea of Elise Boulding. So I wanted to sort of grab onto the 200-year present of FCNL. And I wanted to think about the change we can envision for the future and the change we've lived as FCNL in what might be our 200-year present. So I've asked a couple of people in the audience to help me out with this. First would be someone who isn't quite 100, but we'll look forward to when he is 100 and is here at annual meeting in about 10 years. Ed? Yes, Ed Snyder. So I asked Ed to give us one thought, one thing that he's seen change in his lifetime that he thinks is really important for the pathway to building peace.
Well, what I would say is, some of you know Raymond Wilson, the founder, the first executive secretary of the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And Raymond Wilson spent a huge amount of his time and life thinking about a general and complete disarmament as the goal in international foreign policy. And he got the Ralph Flanders and John Sparkman to put in a resolution in the Senate on that. He worked very hard for a U.S. disarmament agency, and I think if you will, of course it didn't happen, it hasn't happened yet, but if you will look, I think you could maybe verify this, in almost every arms control or disarmament treaty of the last, since 1945 or so, they've got in the preamble that the goal is general and complete disarmament. And that goal is there. And I think that goal is a tremendous thing to think about that's changed in the last 100 years.
Great. Thank you, Ed. Now let's move to the other end of our 200-year present. And I've asked the parents of the youngest person I've seen in this room if they would say a word about what their hopes are in the life of this young, beautiful child, what change they might see in 100 years.
So I'm hoping that there will be a holiday that our culture celebrates, or maybe a whole season of holidays like Advent or Lent, related to the change of the climate going the other way, when hearts and minds changed in ways that were just miraculous.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Great. Wonderful. And so we have a great vision. We have a lot of work to do, but that's okay. That's why we're here. That is why we're here. So that's the long view, just to position us. And I wanted to do that because it just underlines that change takes time. Change takes a lot of time. Elise, in her description of the 200-year present, said, "So think in terms of events over the span and realize how long change takes. You can see how difficult it has been to create these bodies and new ways, and how in many ways we are slipping backwards. But in other ways, we are not. I take comfort," she said, "to know that superpower hegemony has a very limited lifespan in the long spectrum of things." So part of what we're doing in thinking about pivoting to peace, and I really appreciated the discussion this morning with the speakers and the both hopeful support that I heard from you all in the work that's happening within U.S. policy on building capacities for prevention, but also the challenging questions and the need to say, but can't we do better? So I really appreciated that. And part of our work, I think, is how do we help our superpower hegemony end in the least destructive, most transformative way possible? And that's part of what we're doing through FCNL's work. So that's the long view. But where have we been in this work? I want to kind of position some of what you heard this morning from the perspective that I have from doing some of the work that I think did help contribute to the changes that you saw when I was at FCNL with many of you, and tell the story a little bit about where we've come on this spectrum from war is not the answer to peace building. So in about 2000, the year 2000, there was a small gathering of Quaker organizations called together in Britain, actually, that was asking the question related to Kosovo: why is it that when the bombs are falling, we don't know what to say or do? And they said, we really need to grapple with this problem. And out of that meeting, in which FCNL and AFSC and CUNO and others attended, came a sort of commitment from the groups to really say, we have to shift towards prevention. If we're asking that question when the bombs are falling, we have not been doing our work. We have to look much earlier in the spectrum of conflict, the development of conflict, and do prevention work much better. And we have to do that as Quaker organizations. And that, I think, was an important moment, because out of that came a commitment within FCNL to the work of prevention. And it was a commitment so strong that even a year later, when 9/11 happened, and the whole world sort of shifted towards focusing on terrorism, FCNL kept the commitment. They said, yes, absolutely, we're going to work, to prevent a war in Iraq. We're going to work to try to restrain the U.S.'s military action. But at the same time, we're still going to look at the long term. We're still going to say, while we're doing this crisis work, how do we build capacities within the U.S. government to actually be better able to help prevent these situations in the future? And I remember when I started that work, I went back in 2002 to FCNL to do some of this with lobbying. And I remember we were going around with this idea: peaceful prevention of deadly conflict. What is this idea? We would knock on the doors of some members of Congress or talk to people in the administration or even other NGO colleagues and say, we really think we're missing the boat here. We really need to get further upstream on these crises. We're always responding at the last minute, and then we're looking around for the only tools we have, and we think all we can do is intervene militarily. There has to be a better way. And Joe Volk may remember. I've remembered some of these meetings. Do you remember this, Joe? Literally, they couldn't understand the words we were saying. It was like we would say, we're talking about trying to prevent something so that you don't have to intervene later. And they would say, well, if there's not a problem, what are we doing? And we would kind of back up and think, well, we didn't work, that talking points didn't work there. And it was really lonely. It was lonely. And I would go into Joe's office and say, I don't think we're making any progress here. But we kept at it. And I remember it was, a lot of the work that FCNL does is often just being present to ideas that nobody else really wants to listen to yet. And holding those ideas and not letting go of them and speaking them again and again and again, no matter how many times you're banging your head against the wall, speaking them to members of Congress in the what I call public advocacy, all these meetings that happen all around Washington, D.C., standing up and asking, why are we not able to look ahead of this crisis? Why can't we prevent this? That work, after years and years and years, really started to bear fruit. And we started to feel like, you know what, more and more people are talking the same language. And it wasn't all us. There were other people were doing this too. But it felt pretty lonely still. It was a small group. And over time, people began to really sort of start to say, at least, well, gosh, yeah, this intervention, this thing we've done in Iraq, that sure didn't work. Afghanistan's still a mess. Where are we going with this? And so there was a growing dialogue around prevention. What happened was that dialogue tended to be about other people's conflicts. So while people would say, yes, well, if we could rewind the clock on Iraq or Afghanistan, maybe we would want to, but we can't. But if it was somebody else's conflict, if it was Burundi or if it was another crisis in the world, they would say, well, let's figure out how we can prevent that. So we said, okay, that's not ideal, but let's see where this can take us. Let's see if we can push this prevention discussion upstream and get closer to addressing U.S. foreign policy in general. Around 2008 was the time that a group came together. It was actually a meeting called by a former FCNL staff person, Scott Stedgen, to talk at that time about a concept that you may have heard of called responsibility to protect. And he got a bunch of NGOs together to talk about this idea that the international community has a responsibility to protect civilians in situations where their governments are not willing or able to do that. And that meeting, we discovered all these groups showed up. And they wanted to talk about responsibility to protect, not about intervening when the crisis was underway. They wanted to say, first of all, why don't we talk about prevention? Second of all, what is this about the imbalance of the toolbox? Why do we not have enough investments in diplomacy and development and international cooperations? The things that FCNL had been working on, had been advocating for years. That meeting ended and those groups went away, and Scott came to me later and he said, look, we said, okay, they all wanted another meeting. They all wanted to get together and do more work. And so we said, okay, well, maybe we have some kind of an advocacy working group that could form. And Scott came to me and he said, look, this is FCNL's work. This is what FCNL does. They bring coalitions like this together. You got to do this. You just have to find a way to do this. Out of that grew FCNL's work with what's called the Prevention and Protection Working Group, which Allison, I don't know if Allison's here, now coordinates. FCNL's been coordinating since 2008, and which is a place within Washington where groups come together to talk about strengthening U.S. government capacities to prevent atrocities and violent conflict. And that body has done an enormous amount of work in really pushing practical, concrete recommendations. I don't know if you heard Nancy this morning talk about the Genocide Prevention Task Force report. That report came out in just after this group was forming. And this group looked at that report and they said, we don't agree with everything that's in this report, but wow, there are a lot of recommendations in there that actually have to do with building civilian capacities. They're talking about this high-level White House board that would be looking at atrocity prevention. They're talking about strengthening the State Department's own capacities and trainings for atrocity prevention. They're talking about funding, things like a rapid response fund. We should get on that. Now, what happens in Washington is lots and lots and lots of groups issue reports. There are a lot of reports, and they take those reports and they're usually like 30 to 50 pages, very well-researched, good reports. They'll have an executive summary at the front usually, and they'll take them around or they'll release them. And then that often is what happens with that report. And I've been in a lot of meetings with members of Congress or their staff usually who are saying, that, they got the report. I know they got the report, but they haven't read it. They haven't had time to read it. They don't have time to read reports. And so we said as a group then at that time, if we think these recommendations are good, if we think these could actually help begin to shift U.S. policy and approaches so that they can begin to really move towards prevention, we have to do the work that makes these real. We have to make sure these actually get implemented. That means advocacy. That means lobbying. And so it's because those recommendations really gave it an agenda to that group that a lot of the lobbying and advocacy moved towards pushing those forward. I was just last week at a meeting at West Point. I got invited to West Point for the first time. It was really interesting. It was a student conference of all their cadets, military cadets, and students from universities around the country. They called it a Civ Mill Dialogue with the students. And I was invited to be help facilitate a roundtable on responsibility to protect. This idea is still around. People are still debating it. And at that, Madeleine Albright spoke. She was the big keynote speaker. And she came to our little classroom because she loves this idea, because it was her Genocide Prevention Task Force report. It was a Madeleine Albright, Bill Cohen report. So she came to our little group, and she came in and she said, this is I hope I'm not disturbing. Of course, you're not disturbing, Secretary. And she's she's just a wonderful spirit of a person. And she sat down and she said, this is my favorite topic. And she said, and of course the students, we kind of were encouraging the students to ask her questions. And so they kind of said, well, why is your favorite topic? Tell us what you think about it. And she said, well, in 2008, we did this report called the Genocide Prevention Task Force report. And it's probably the only report I've seen in Washington that's actually been implemented. The recommendations have actually been implemented. And I just kind of chuckled in the background because I thought, yeah, because people went to work to make it happen, So I think that part of what we've seen, and I won't go into everything that you heard the speakers already say, but what we've seen in terms of where we've been is that this work has really progressed because of the very practical efforts that FCNL and others have put into it. And so we actually do now have Complex Crises Fund. Nancy's, I didn't tee any of those people up to say exactly what we want them to say, right? So Nancy Lindborg, president of USIP, she was at USAID, she's up here telling you that the Complex Crises Fund is the most important pot of money at USAID. How many people here have been lobbying on the Complex Crises Fund for a few years? Yeah, so that's pretty good. CSO is the bureau that Sharon Morris was representing from State Department. That bureau didn't exist before. It didn't exist at the start of FCNL's work on PPDC. It's doing some good work. I went from here, after listening to them, I went to a training at the Foreign Service Institute because I was asked to go speak on Burundi, on the situation in Burundi right now, to a group of State Department Foreign Service officers who are at a training, all-day training for mass atrocity prevention, run by a longtime friend of FCNL, Tori Holt, says hello to Joe and others, who's now a Deputy Assistant Secretary in the State Department for International Affairs. And, she stopped me and she said, yeah, we got, and we also got a UN Security Council resolution on Burundi, and this, prevention work is kind of, it's moving. I remember the early days of conversation with her where we went in to talk to her, and I said, Tori, why? She's always looking at peacekeeping. And I said, why don't you look at prevention, like not just peacekeeping when there's this crisis? And she was like, you're never going to get anywhere with this. You're not this, I don't know, Bridget. It's not going to go anywhere. So, the change that we've seen, I think, is remarkable and is worth celebrating. I want to say a few words, though, about the challenges. Because what we saw from the beginning and what we continue to see is that prevention, this idea that war isn't working and there are other ways, it doesn't yet apply to the U.S.'s own conflicts, right? And so these are the questions, and this is the issue about the U.S.'s own role in the world and this challenge. And I think that is one of the big pivots that we still need to make. The U.S. is now talking about prevention. And actually, I think it's a little bit better equipped to do prevention. But it's not walking the walk, right? It's not walking the walk yet. Except, I have to say, thanks to Kate Gould, we have prevented a large strategic war with Iran, right? And I have to say... And I saw Kate coming down, and I kind of thought, why am I giving this talk? Why isn't Kate up there giving this talk? And she said, Bridget, I remember when we made this postcard, and we wanted to link prevention and peacebuilding and Iran. And I was like, yeah, we did a postcard. That was good. So this work is of many hands, and I think there's much that we've done. So this is a little bit about where we are. But I have to say that where we are, it is a tale of two oceans. So George Fox, he said, I saw the ocean of darkness, and I saw an ocean of light. And those oceans were, I think they were side by side. They exist at the same time. And we struggle with the suffering, that we see in the world a lot. And we struggle to hold on to the hope. I had the opportunity a couple years ago to sort of dive into the ocean of darkness, it felt like, when I was offered this fellowship with the USAID on atrocity prevention. And I was offered to do a 2-year fellowship with them to try to implement the things I'd been lobbying on from the outside, right, on this whole atrocities prevention agenda. And so I thought, this is a really good opportunity, probably. I should really take this. But I was really scared because I thought, we are still in Iraq. We are still in a war on terror that's not getting any better. It's getting different. We're using different approaches. I don't know, is that better? But it's not getting better, right? And can I bear to go inside the U.S. government right now as a Quaker, as someone who wants to live their faith, and wants to stand in principle? And so I did what I do at every question in my career, and I sent an email to Joe Volk, and I said, I don't know what to do about this. Am I supposed to really do this? And he said, Bridget. He said, I don't know. It's a very humble way. I don't know anything, Bridget. And he said, but it sounds to me like you have an interesting opportunity. You might even be able to make a little change. And you're kind of afraid of getting your hands dirty. And I said, damn, he's right again, So I went into to USAID, and just to give a little bit about where I feel we are now, drawing from the lessons from my time there briefly. So I was an atrocity prevention fellow in a part of USAID that's called the Office for Conflict Management and Mitigation. And my job was to sort of support the work of the Atrocities Prevention Board. We were supporting Nancy Lindborg at that point, who was the USAID representative to the board, and to try to do various other things that CMM does. CMM is a nice part of USAID that works specifically on peacebuilding, conflict prevention work. And the things I discovered working inside, the lessons I learned, first of all, wow, lobbying works. It actually works. I had the same experience you just had with Nancy. I was in there, and we were talking about, okay, we need to mobilize potential funding on Burundi that she mentioned, using the CCF. We got CCF's the best tool we've got. I was like, really? People inside the government think this too? And we saw the APB also taking up things that I hadn't realized it was going to take up. So disarmament issues. The Arms Trade Treaty, when I was an intern at FCNL, we were working on the Arms Trade Code of Conduct. Could we get the U.S. government and other governments to say, at least we're not going to sell weapons to situations of massive human rights violations or where there's conflict going on? A lot of work trying to get this legislation passed. Eventually, that contributed to what became and what is now the Arms Trade Treaty. There's an international treaty, folks, on the arms trade. It's not perfect. It's not great. But it does hold up human rights standards for weapon sales. The White House was saying that one of its important tools on atrocities prevention is its support for the Arms Trade Treaty. I said, really? Doesn't show in practice yet, right? But they're lifting up a treaty that wouldn't have existed if people hadn't worked for many years towards it. So lobbying works. Lesson number 2. Whoa, are our civilian capacities stretched thin and poorly focused? I really did see the reality of the imbalance of military versus civilian in just very practical ways. How many people can we get to a meeting? Can anybody literally get to the meeting they've just called in the last half hour that somebody have to send somebody to? No, because we've only got 3 people and they're all in 7 other meetings right now. So the level of civilian capacities within the U.S. government is particularly on some of the issues we care about, particularly on conflict prevention, peacebuilding issues, is very thin. And it's not necessarily well-focused. The urgent crowds out the important. It always does within the U.S. government. Lesson number 3, there's a lot of good people. We know this, you know this. There's a lot of good people inside U.S. government on the Hill, in the administration, working really hard, and they work within really difficult, stifling bureaucratic situations. How many people have worked inside the U.S. government at some point, maybe? So some of you may know some of this as well and have experience in it. But I really found that the rewards were not to push new ideas, that you don't get rewarded for that, right? You don't get rewarded for telling people there might be problems in the country that we're, where they might be working. You don't get rewarded for that. But what I also found, the other lesson I found was that there was a hunger to have people who would do that in the system. There was a hunger to have people raise their hand in a meeting and say, well, can't we think of some alternatives besides intervening? Or can't we think of some ways of protecting people that use nonviolent mechanisms? Can we look at community peacebuilding? Can we put some money into that? There was a remarkable hunger for that. The experience on Central African Republic, while I was there, was when the crisis started unfolding. And the Atrocities Prevention Board really did sort of mobilize and lift that up. And I was amazed to find, when we started talking about what could be done within USAID, that asking people to do peacebuilding work, saying, why doesn't USAID fund peacebuilding, local community level based peacebuilding? You're like, that's okay, good idea. I said, really? You think that's a good idea? We managed to mobilize funding to do it. That funding was very important and contributed to work which Florence and others are actually doing in CAR that's very important. So there are ways of making change. Finally, I would just say that the other lesson I would note is that I think there is a new generation on the rise. I think all these programs in universities on conflict resolution, on peace building, there they are. They're in the back. The new generation is in the back. Thank you. Thank you. And they're not as scared as I was. They're saying, well, let me go work for the State Department. Let me see what I can do within these bureaucracies. Or let me get on the Hill and work with members of Congress. Or let me do my thing, whatever it is. But they come with this seeped in their blood. They don't want a world, first of all, where the climate has been so destroyed that they don't have a future. They don't want a world that's rife in war and violence, and they believe there are alternatives. And those people are increasingly working their way up in the system. So I want to ask Emily to come up now, because I think that one of the things that we've been doing, and one of the things we've achieved, is that we're winning the argument. We've actually, I think, you heard the Colonel say it today, war is not working. War is not the answer. We've kind of won the argument, right? But we have to now pivot to peace, right? And we have to move U.S. government from words to practice, practice of peace building. So where do we go from here? I just want to mention a few things, because I've been talking a while, and I want to have time to hear you talk too. First, I think recognizing the 200-year present is really helpful. I used to joke that at every FCNL annual meeting, somebody at some point would talk about, we are in a historic moment. It was actually usually true. That was kind of the weird thing, that it was actually usually true. But we actually kind of are. Every moment, this is the 200-year history we have, and remembering that long-term change, it really helps me when I start to get overwhelmed by that ocean of darkness that's out there. So remembering that long-term change. Practicing prophetic pragmatism. This is what FCNL does. This is what FCNL taught me. This is what your task is tomorrow. Prophetic pragmatism. Long-term vision, practical change today. That is what I think will get us to further change. Simon Fisher, if any of you know him, he's a sort of peace studies guy, peace builder guy in the UK. And he has an idea of transactional change and transformational change. And that actually you need both. You need transformational ideas and things that are tapping into the most amazing. And you need transactional stuff too. You need institutions, bureaucracies, change, training, all those things, funding, resources. And so I think prophetic pragmatism and the way that FCNL practices is that sweet spot, right, between the two. So we need to find that sweet spot and work into it. We need to look ahead at what's next on the agenda. So I think there are opportunities. You've heard about some of them already today, and you're going to lobby on the APB tomorrow as an opportunity to institutionalize a change, which is not perfect, but is a step forward. And I think we need to begin then, after we take those steps, to look forward to how do we really demonstrate the alternatives to war, that they can work for U.S. problems, U.S. conflicts, as well as other conflicts. Nancy talked about evidence-based. The shared security dialogue and the work around shared security talks about what the Colonel said, that we're all interconnected now. We cannot talk about other people's problems. All the problems are our problems. And so how do we get U.S. policymakers to make that shift? And finally, I really believe there's a lot of space, but I really do, within the U.S. policy to look at nonviolent action and nonviolence. There's a really interesting curiosity and ongoing, beginning to be more and more work around nonviolence and nonviolent action in Washington. And I think there's a lot we could do with that. And I'll say that I think supporting local peace building and supporting communities and the way, letting them drive the change they want in their own societies, ultimately helping our policymakers understand why local communities and peace builders, they're the ones who understand the change that's needed and are best equipped and positioned to make it. So let me close with a couple things about hope. So what happened with hope for me this week and thinking about what to say was that I really was like, I don't know what to say about hope. I'm usually really hopeful, but I had a bad week. And I had, Theo can tell you, I had probably the worst professional meeting of my life yesterday, and I just had really kind of things were not going. I said, how am I going to inspire these people? So I said, okay, let me think about what other people have said to me recently that has inspired me. And so that's what I want to share with you. I want to share with you a few thoughts from others. First, I want to share a thought from Carl Wilkins. And Carl Wilkins was the only the only American, the only person from the U.S. to stay through the Rwandan genocide. So he stayed. He was a missionary. He worked with an orphanage. He wrote a book. It's very good. He's got a documentary. It's excellent. He stayed. Because I went to the Friends Peace Team's 20th anniversary and he spoke there, I got really intrigued by him. I met him. We were at USAID. We were working on a training. There is a training now for USAID. All USAID officers who have to go to high-risk countries will get a training on mass atrocities prevention. And we had to make it into, because of bureaucracy, we had to make it into like a 45-minute online, first step training. Prevent mass atrocities in 45 minutes, right? So I worked with wonderful people there. And one of the persons on the team said, I heard about this guy, Carl Wilkins. I saw he's got this documentary. I was like, yeah. He said, why don't we shake things up? Why don't we put some of the footage from that in there? And it's got actually this woman, Laura Lane, who was a young Foreign Service officer serving in Rwanda in 1994 and ended up having to evacuate the whole embassy. It's got her in it saying, think of all the good the U.S. could have done if it had just stayed. So it's kind of challenging to put this into a training for Foreign Service officers. It's not really what you don't usually get clearance on those kind of things. But we got a clip in that, and we actually called Carl in to talk to us about it. And so we were sitting with Carl, and we were just talking to him, and he's just a wonderful speaker, a great person. And finally, I said to him, do you ever get to the point where you just feel like people keep telling you, or you yourself just kind of look at a situation and say, option A is not good. Option B is not good. I don't know. What are the alternatives? What's left? And what do you do? And he kind of leaned forward. He said, when there's no option A and there's no option B, you look for option C. And he said, and you keep looking. And he was kind of like kept leaning over the table towards us. And he was like, and even if you don't find it, you keep looking. And even if you die looking for it, you keep looking for it. And then he kind of stepped back and he said, does that resonate at all? And I was like, yes, it really resonates. And he lived it. It's how he lived. So that's one thing that gives me hope. Another thing that gives me hope is these West Point students I was at with this roundtable. So they had to write a paper. Their challenge was they had to get together and they had to come and write a paper about responsibility to protect. And I'll just give you the thesis. The thesis statement at the end was that they believed that in order for R2P, responsibility to protect, to be real, it had to be proactive in prevention, prudent in intervention, and persistent in rebuilding. And I did not plant that with them. I swear. I said to them, I'm using this. Can I use this? And that was all theirs. That was all theirs. I also had an experience. I was traveled recently to, I told some of you, Rwanda and Burundi and Congo. And I was in Congo with this wonderful local peace builder that we support, the Peace Direct supports. And he was driving me around, and I was asking him things, and we got into a conversation. And I said, you know what, how do you keep going when this is like such a difficult situation? And he said, you know, I believe we have a ministry of reconciliation. When I'm feeling really bad, then I draw my strength from what I've done. I have a ministry, and encouraging one another is one of the most important things to do. He said, you know, peace is not an absence of war, and peace is not the presence of harmony. Peace, for me, is when people live together in recognition of the value God put in one another. And that gave me hope. And then, back at, I only have a few more of these, but I got a lot of hope from people. Then, back at the West Point thing, I was in the bus going back to the hotel one night. And the bus was about to take away, and it was just me because I left at a weird time. And this guy comes around and he jumps in the bus, and he just starts talking to me immediately. And I was like, just talking. And he was leading the conversation, and somehow we got into this discussion. And finally, he is saying to me, without me asking him anything, and this is one of those things I almost don't want to tell you because it makes you're like, really, this really happened? And he's like, you know, military officer. Sorry, this is a military guy. He says, you know, I've been telling my students over here, I said, we've been doing a lot of war, and it's not working. And so I'm talking to them about, let's try something else. You know, let's try something else. And I'm like, yeah, right on. I'm with you. And I'm thinking he's going to say, you know, let's try diplomacy. And he says, I'm saying to them, let's try love. I swear to you he said this. And then he said, you know, I know it sounds crazy to you. I know you probably think I'm crazy. And I said, no, it doesn't sound crazy at all. And then and that was the end of the conversation. We got to the hotel, and I was like, no, it doesn't. That's what I needed to hear, you know. And I get out, and we're all at the same hotel. And he says, oh, no, I'm not getting out. And I was like, oh, you don't? He says, no, I'm going on. I swear he was an angel. I swear he disappeared from that. He just disappeared after that bus ran away. I really think he did. So anyways, that was also very important. So finally, the last thing I'll say, two last things. I can't stop. I literally, before I came here, I went to that training. I went, and then I had to get my kids from school. And I'm at school, and I'm talking to moms. And in Washington, the weird thing is that these people who are moms at and dads at your school also work sometimes in this world. So Lorelei Kelly is this woman who has worked with FCNL in the past. She knows all about peaceful prevention, deadly conflict work. She's done work with preventing violence in various ways. And she's a mom at school, and she's there. She said, hey, how's it going? How's annual meeting? And she was all excited. And I said, oh, it's great. And she said, you know, I just can't believe it. All the stuff that's happening right now. It's like, you know, it's taken 12 years, but it's happened. And the thing is, there's no press release, but everybody kind of knows it's you guys. Everybody knows it's you. and she said, and I was leaving, she said, you know, peace is a growth industry. Peace right now is a growth industry. I said, yes! Okay, last one. From my Quaker meeting, from Meeting for Worship this past Sunday. So I spend most of the time with my kids, and then I come in with the kids. So I usually get about 10 minutes of worship, and I never hear any messages, and it's all sort of like never really get centered. But I sat down, and these messages started immediately about hope. And a woman said, she said, there are 3 types of hope. There's hope for, hope in, and hope with. And hope for, and she used different metaphors, but for us, I think hope for would be like we really hope for a better U.S. policy, right? We really hope for a better U.S. government. And hope in is like we have hope in those good people we know are in the institutions and inside Capitol Hill, and we have a lot of hope in them. And hope with is us, and hope with is our Quaker process. It's our process of working with those spaces. And so I really do find my hope with you. I find my hope with the work of FCNL and all the thousands of people who are working with you and with envisioning this 200-year present. The other point of hope at the meeting was the idea of not that hope is the expression, the triumph of hope over experience. And this really made me think about these 2 oceans. And I was like, what is that? The triumph of hope over experience? Because that could be a negative thing, right? But then I thought, I think for Quakers, sometimes it's that the triumph of hope is our experience, right? So, from George Fox. I saw that there was an ocean of darkness and death, but an infinite ocean of light and love, which flowed over the ocean of darkness. In that also, I saw the infinite love of God, and I had great opening.